Hello and welcome to Film 2231, Indigenous Film. Today we are going to talk about a tendency growing in recreating and reconstructing the pre-colonized era among Indigenous filmmakers. After the success of Atanarjwa, or The Fast Runner by Zachariah Kunuk, that was entirely filmed in Inuktitut language, we can see a growing number of films that deal with reimaginations of pre-colonized past authentically. When I say that, the authenticity is important because it's not something like Pocahontas, which is filmed by Western, again, colonized lens, as like a Disney musical, but movies that try to get the perspective of indigenous communities at that time prior to the disappearance of the culture. So these films are shot in indigenous languages. For example, there was another film that was released in 2018 by the names of The Edge of the Knife that is entirely shot in Haida, a language that is only spoken by less than 100 people in the world, and mainly because in the early 1900s, the entire population, like about 95% of the population, was erased by diseases such as chickenpox. And at that time, there were more than 300 survivors. So just making a movie in that language, creating rehearsal, and performing in that language was a challenge for the team of filmmakers. In a safe way, The Fast Runner and the movie that we are going to watch for this week, The Searcher, like the entire crew, like about 90% of the film crew, consist of Inuit professionals. So these films try to get close to the way the community looked like at that time, the relationship with nature. So there were researches into the language and even the costumes and mythologies and the way of life, because all those things have changed. But they also try to get the moral outlooks of the time, and something that was not touched by, again, the colonized European lens. Camera is a neutral instrument, but the gaze was always the ethnographic gaze, the gaze from the powerful. So these filmmakers try to avoid colonial time viewpoints and moralities. In short, in this process of recreating the past authentically, they should also subvert the conventions of ethnographic documentaries done by Western media to capture the image of indigenous communities by the sort of curiosities that they had. Coming out of their colonialized viewpoints, ideas such as dehumanization, humiliation, sometimes romanticization, exoticization. So now the person who is behind the camera should use the camera as a tool for um, the medium constructed by colonized power. So all the conventions are built based on those viewpoints and find ways of rejecting those conventions. In our previous sessions, we talked about how the so-called Indian Hollywoods were portrayed by American filmmakers. We also talked about movies like Smoke Signals, that is about the relationship and the dialogue between the members of the community and at some points the settlers' views of the community. For creating the anti-colonialist media, the indigenous filmmakers should have a control over the means of production, even the distribution and broadcast ideally. And for that reason, making these movies in their original languages and consisting the entire crew of Haida for the Edge of the Knife or Inuit for Fast Runner or other Zachariah Kunuk films are crucial.
Yeah, well, geez, for myself, I'm a Haida person, Haida man. But we never grew up with the language, but it was never spoken to us from our elders, and it was just something that we didn't have. And so coming into this and having to be actors as well, and portray a story that needed to be believable on top of learning a language that is our own traditional language, but is also foreign to us, was extremely difficult. We're so comfortable using English, and the way we speak Haida is using our throats, and so we would have our elders would sit with us, and we'd practice the lines over and over and over and over and over, and our elders were really hard on us for the way we pronounce things, and it would make sure that we said things exactly right, and it was up to us to act and say those things exactly the way that they were supposed to be said, and so to have it not as a fluent language it was really hard to get into the character of who I was supposed to be, which was Ḳ'uuna, and portray some emotions and portray a real conversation with somebody which none of us really understood. And so we would spend hours. Tyler and I we would sit in our cabin or in our tent, and we'd practice our lines, and we'd do it over and over. We'd sit on our stairs, and we'd be watching, just sitting and enjoying nature and practicing over and over and over and over, and deciding like what kind of in our heads what we wanted to portray like emotionally, and I would do that with Adina as well. We would just practice over and over. We had a lot of incredibly tired days and tired nights. We hardly slept. We knew the responsibility that we had on us to do something that was totally authentic to what our culture is, and so we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and it was probably the hardest thing I'd ever been a part of, and to be able to accomplish it in the way that we had has been stunning even to myself, and so I'm not sure how everybody else felt, but it was to please your own elders, to please your own older ladies is the hardest thing in the world, and everybody else doesn't matter.
Indigenous filmmakers face a number of problems in creating this anti-colonial lens because the cinematic medium has always been influenced by the Western consumers, where, for example, the idea of oral tradition for passing the truth and knowledge is alien to them. In the previous lectures, I talked about the idea of cultural indigenization in films like The Searchers or The Fast Runner, how its subversion of or appropriation of Western genre, even the title is taken from the most known Western film like The Searchers, into the Inuit settings. Similar ideas I discussed with regards to the notion of the justice system, Inuit justice system, how it's expressed in the movie Fast Runner. But for this week, I'm showing this movie, The Searcher. So pay attention to all those things, how the idea of Western genre has been subverted in this film, and those oral tradition, the notion of justice. But also pay attention to this authentic way of reconstructing the past. So when watching this film, pay attention to the use of, for example, this symbolic elements of mise en scène when objects are gaining their metaphysical and spiritual characteristic in the narrative space of the film, kind of inspired by shamanic ideas and practices, or how the ideas of oral tradition or prophecies are presented, and the whole landscape of the film. For example, if it's portraying raw and preparing raw meat and the fact that the raw meat should be eaten, why a movie is focusing on that practice. This video I found on YouTube is very informative, although there was no information with regards to the person who made it, but I will try to put the complete link on the Blackboard.
Ơi, như chow. Người ta nói là tổ. Bikin apa? Aku nama tu. Harus satu nilai kita.
Adana Jarin, Emery.